Some viewers may find the use of cuss words in this video to be offensive. Others won't give a shit. You've been warned. The Underground. This phrase drives us batshit crazy.
Hey everybody, welcome to The Underground, episode 2. This is the special home edition. You probably noticed that there's a little bit of a difference in our setup. We intend for this to be the three of us hanging out together, having a live conversation. However, with the state of the world today, we have decided to play it safe. And so we're coming to you live via Zoom. Zoom. If you haven't bought stock in Zoom, buy some stock in Zoom because it's going up. My name is Scott McKinley. With me, as always, we've got Rick Howard.
Hi, everybody.
And Big Daddy Sean Hales.
Hello, hello.
And tonight we are going to be starting our own personal stories. So I'm going to turn the time over to Mr. Rick Howard.
So, and just to expand a little bit, just know that this is not the intention to do the show this way. It's a different dynamic, us not being able to be together. Hopefully this is a very short-term thing, and maybe just this one episode will be like this and next time we'll be together. But we felt like we needed to follow the directives of the people who are smarter than us and not get together tonight. The whole purpose we've talked about of this show is to get into the stories that we've had transitioning from organized religion to where we are now, and then delving into other people's stories and having that conversation build from there. And so, like Scott said, we're going to start that tonight, and over the next 3 episodes, we'll focus on each of our individual stories. And tonight is Scott's night. So to get it started, Scott, talk a little bit about what it was like for you being born in the Mormon church, growing up in a strict religious household. Just what was it like growing up in the church at that point for you?
You know, I was born in 1974, so right in the kind of I don't want to say the peak time for the church, but you know, they've been around for a while. They were started in 1830, so we're well over the 100-year mark. The pioneers, they've all made it to Utah. I was born in California, and I was born to very devout members of the church. Both my parents.
Sorry, maybe that's what you were just going to say. Were both your parents born into the church?
Yeah, both my parents were born into the church. My dad's, his whole side of the family, every one of them members of the church. The McKinley side, it's deep, deep, deep. The Park side, my mom's side of the family, she was born into the church, but they were inactive. Both my grandparents, I never met my grandfather. He passed away before my mom was even married. But both my grandparents, they drank, they smoked, they attended church, I think, when it was convenient for them. They both worked on Sundays, and so it just wasn't in the cards for them to be at church. But you know, their whole side of the family, the Park side, they were members, but more along the lines of what people refer to as probably Jack Mormons is what the Park side was. However, the McKinley side, which if anybody knows, the McKinley side is a very dominant side. They were all LDS, and we were raised that way. I went to church every Sunday. We did not play outside on Sundays. Growing up in California, that was really like being in a prison, because all of my friends, I lived in this cul-de-sac, they would be outside playing, and I mean, eventually over time, they just stopped asking if we could come out and play. But we didn't go outside to play on Sundays. Towards the latter years, living at home, we would go out to eat on Sundays, but it was justified because it was family time. And so everything else, though, parents had callings. I went to seminary. I didn't ever graduate from a year of seminary. I always kind of had just this, I don't want to say a little rebellious side, but there was always just a little something in me. And it would surface a little bit later on down the line. So grew up in that household, and from my earliest memories, I can remember deciding that I was going to go on a mission. It was a song that we sang in primary, I Hope They Call Me on a Mission. And we would have the missionaries in our ward over for dinner pretty regularly. And I mean, these guys were just up on this pedestal, just these missionaries that were just, in my opinion, they were just perfect, these guys. And so, yeah, I had every intention of, after I graduated from high school, because I turned 19 the fall after graduating from high school, the September right after, I just knew I was going to turn in my mission papers and go on a mission.
Was there ever any question, that you'd go on a mission, or was that just always there?
You know what? I don't think there was, even though, and this is kind of the important thing, even though, I went to church, but I questioned some of the things in church with terms of like the leaders. I didn't ever really question policy. I was scared of God. I grew up with a real complex of God is just waiting for me to screw up so he can punish me, and I'm not going to make it to in the Mormon faith, they've got 3 different levels of heaven, and the top level of heaven is called the celestial kingdom. And there was just some real deep fears that I wasn't going to get there. I was a healthy American, your average teenage boy. I did things that all teenage boys do.
Stop playing with yourself.
And as a result, I just grew up with just this fear and this shame that I was never going to be quite good enough to make it to the celestial kingdom. And so I think, kind of as a defense mechanism, I developed kind of a tougher, well, I'm not gonna do everything by the book type mentality, which is why I never graduated from seminary. I would always start, but I would usually get into fights with the teachers in seminary on stupid things, not like doctrinal things, but just dumb things that would justify me not having to be able to go.
I was going to say, for people who don't know, in the Mormon Church, which is officially known as the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints, there are different levels of the afterlife. Scott mentioned the celestial kingdom a few minutes ago, and that is what most people refer to as heaven. The celestial kingdom is where God lives. That's where, if you're a good person, you do everything like you're supposed to, you'll end up in the celestial kingdom. And then depending on how bad you were, you'll go down to different levels within the Mormon heaven system. So I just wanted to point that out for people who don't understand what the celestial kingdom was.
I think it's important to also note this, that the hell in the Mormon religion is referred to as outer darkness, and the people who are cursed to go to hell are like the worst of the worst, but nothing is worse than having been a member, given the gift of the Holy Ghost, having gone through the temple and renounced your belief in basically the Mormon faith. So the 3 of us, according to what my family believes, are going to be in outer darkness because we've denied the Holy Ghost according to what we were raised to believe. Am I right?
Oh,
Yeah,
for sure. Yeah, once you start to get that, they call it the witness, right?
Yeah.
Once you have that witness of having things given to you spiritually, yeah, that's where you really have that fear. And I guess it goes back to the fear you were talking about, Scott, and that was the fear of just, God is going to punish you if you get out of line in any way, right?
I had that. I remember I was always thinking I had cancer when I was in high school. Anytime I'd feel a pain, I was like, oh, that's God punishing me for masturbating. That's what that is. That is me being punished. And it sounds stupid, and I see you chuckling, and I'm sure people watching this might chuckle at it, but that's how embedded it was. I mean, as a member of the church, I had to go to a bishop's meeting every year on my birthday and be given a worthiness interview, starting when I was 12 years old until the time I was 21 years old and home from my mission and got married in the temple. That was the last time I went. But I remember every time I went, sitting in that bishop's interview, being asked if I had problems with the law of chastity, meaning am I jerking off?
Oh, mama. Oh, mama.
Or am I doing inappropriate things with girls? And I just remember lying every time, just going like, I just don't really feel like that's any of their business for me to have to tell them that. And so I never once, not once, did I ever confess anything to a priesthood leader, because in my opinion, and from such a young age, I believed that's between me and God. And I don't feel like it's any of your, which goes completely against the Mormon church from the earliest age, starting at age 12, right around the time when all that stuff started taking place. I was terrified because of just this fear of what God was going to think of me.
So would you say that we talked a little bit about you getting, going on a mission, whether there's any question, would you say that going on a mission was just a matter of feeling that fear and pressure of, I have to go on a mission or else I'm not?
Yeah, I think it's a combination of actually two things. The first was what you're saying, is that like it's ordained. It's already been decided. I'm going on a mission. Like the thought of telling my parents I was not going to go wasn't even in the equation. Like it's the year 2020. This was back in 1993 when I went on a mission. I hear families or people saying that they're like, my older brother, his kid didn't go on a mission. Sean, your kid didn't go on a mission. Like I hear people talk about their kids that decided they weren't going to go. And I'm like, son of a bitch, I didn't know that was an option. To me, it just wasn't. Like I was going to go on a mission. The second part was that, I really struggled in school. I had ADD. My grades were awful because my attention span was just so short. And so, junior year when people were taking the SAT, my reason for not taking the SAT was, one, deep down, is I was so insecure. I didn't think I was going to get a good score. But two, I was just like, nope, I'll go on a mission and then I'll come home and I'll be a cartoonist and life will just be splendid. So part of the reason I went on a mission was because of me just realizing I kind of been goofing off a little bit in my membership with the church. Like up to this point, I went to church and I held, I was the deacons quorum president and the teachers quorum president and the assistant to the president and the priest quorum. I did all those things. I'd go on splits with missionaries. I did baptisms for the dead in the temple. I mean, I did all of this. If there was a church activity, I was there. I was always at those things. And that's living in the state of California and up in Seattle, where there were not many members of the church. And so we all kind of stuck together. And so that was kind of my core group of friends. I had some people outside of it, but I just thought, you know what, I'll go on a mission. And then this is going to be my opportunity to gain that testimony and, become a kind of like the Amish when they let them go out and party and have to make that decision if they're going to become a member. I was like, well, I'm going to go on a mission and I'm going to learn about the gospel and I'm going to just completely embrace what it's all about. And then I'll come home and I'll live the rest of my life. I'll get married in the temple. I'll get married right when I get home. And then I'll just go on and I'll just be a good standing member of the church.
And Rick, we know what it was like living in Utah. If you didn't go on a mission, and you probably had friends like this too, if you didn't go on a mission, what was the general sense of the congregation?
Oh, I was like Scott. I didn't know anybody who didn't go on a mission. It wasn't a thing. There was a guy my age. Now he was a month younger than me, so I don't know if I knew at the time, but there's a guy that I grew up with who didn't go. And maybe a couple guys, but they were after me, so I didn't. But growing up, I mean, it was almost.
You brought a mark on your family.
Not in the realm of possibility.
That's where I was going about it.
if you didn't go, that would have obviously been a huge deal for me. And we'll get into this. I'll get into this when I tell my story. But for me, the biggest, that wasn't even a thing to me, not going on a mission.
Yeah.
My biggest thing was getting sent home from your mission. That was the big X that I saw in my mind as a kid growing up.
Well, of course.
Going on a mission just didn't seem like it was, like Scott said, it wasn't really an option.
So let me explain to those people that are watching this that aren't affiliated with the Mormon Church. If you get sent home from your mission, you've basically just cast this shadow over you. All the girls from the time they're 12 years old, and gosh, from the time they're in primary, they're singing songs about, I hope to see the temple. I'm going there. I love to see the temple. I'm going there someday. It's talking about getting married in the temple. And the girls are taught you're going to marry who?
Return missionary.
As much as boys are, their lives are directed at going on a mission, the girls' lives are directed at marrying one of those missionaries when they get home.
Yeah. So at this point, I wasn't thinking about getting sent home.
Yeah.
That wasn't even a thought. It was about getting my ass out there and going, this is going to be my shot to get out and really develop. I hadn't even read the Book of Mormon before I went on a mission.
So the logical question for most people, now it might seem obvious because of where things are at now and the fact that we're having these conversations, but at the time, the next obvious question would have been, okay, so did it work?
Did I become a strong member of the church?
You went on a mission to try and find this testimony and to, like you said, get on the path to the married in the temple, nice Mormon girl, white picket fence, all of that stuff. That's kind of where your mission fits in, is sort of or you were looking at it as kind of the catalyst to put you on that path.
So here's the thing that I have to dance around this really, really carefully, because after we've gotten done with the three of us sharing our experience with leaving the church, we're going to tell you the story about how we got sent home from our mission by a general authority, and that whole experience. But in order for me to kind of recount or tell you a little bit about my transition leaving the church, you've got to understand we were sent home. I was sent home 3 months early. Rick was sent home 4 months early, and Sean was sent home 5 months early. We came home all together with 2 other people. You've heard us speak about that in the first episode. And then we're given opportunities to either go back out somewhere in the States or take an honorable release. I always relate it to that episode of Seinfeld where they're having the contest, and 5 minutes after agreeing to the contest, Kramer comes walking in and slams his money on the table.
I'm out.
When they said I could have an honorable release, I know a good deal when I see it. So I took the honorable release. Now, having said that, that will come back into the picture in a little bit, in a little while. But there were a couple things that happened on my mission that rattled me a little bit. The whole mission rattled me to my core, because what I was exposed to wasn't the beloved primary song that I was singing. I got exposed to the business side of the LDS church. I got exposed to the boss being the mission president and the VP being the area presidency. And it was all about numbers. How many discussions, how many baptisms, numbers. In fact, there was one specific zone conference where they stood up and they challenged us to teach 40 discussions a week. They didn't just challenge us. Somebody stood up in the conference, another missionary, and they brought him from another zone, and he spoke about how he and his companion had taught 40 discussions. And when I sat there and heard that, I just remember getting pissed off and just going like, that's the biggest load of crap. This is Australia. Australia is not a very high baptizing mission. And I had known what working my butt off looked like. And it's interesting because I kept lots of journals while I was on my mission. And I was reading through one of my first 6-month journals when I was down in the island state of Tasmania. And I was working with Elder Knotts, who this guy was like one of the hardest working missionaries, and I loved it. And I wrote in my journal how exhausted we were. And we had set this goal to teach 13 discussions for the week, and we were just busting our tail. We'll jump ahead about a year, and now we've got them crunching 40 discussions a week at us. We had our district leaders or our zone leaders calling us up. I remember getting really pissed off when a zone leader called me up and asked me to report my stats for the week. The stats were, how many discussions did you have? How many first discussions? How many commitments to be baptized? How many baptisms did you have? And I remember I can't remember who the zone leader was, doesn't matter, but I gave him my stats for the week, and I remember he said, wow, Elder McKinley, that's not a very good week, is it? And I got pissed. And I told him that it's none of his business what my week looks like, that type of comment is the type of comment that's going to really deflate the missionaries, because we're all working for free. We're working for 2 years with no pay. We don't get to see family. We don't get to talk to family. And it's a job. And so I got exposed to this business side, and I also got exposed to the people that were striving for leadership positions, and I saw the ugly side of that, and I really got turned off. However, there was a couple things that happened. One, there was an article that came out while I was out on my mission, and it talked about the temple ceremony. And there was a family that I was really close to, and one of the daughters had read this article, and it disclosed pretty much what goes on inside the temples.
So I think it's important to point out, this was an article outside of the church, right? This wasn't an article.
Oh yeah, no, this was an article that was written by a former member of the church. She had left the church, and we're told and taught to just see those people as being just completely taken by the adversary. Like, they have lost their way. They're in the control of the devil, basically. And I mean, that was what I was always taught, was anybody that's talking anything that's anti-Mormon, you avoid it, you don't read it, you steer clear from it. And it's one of those ways that I was controlled, don't read it because it's authored by the adversary. That's what I was trying to say. It was authored by the adversary. So I get called up by this girl, and she was really upset. She said, Elder McKinley, I've read this stuff and it's just not sitting well with me. And I said, okay, I'll tell you what, I'll read the article, and then I'll talk to you about it, and I'll let you know what's real, and I'll let you know if there's any truth to it, or if there's anything that are lies. And there was one particular thing that was in this article, and it talked about a penalty. In the temple, there's certain things that go on. I'm not going to disclose that stuff here. I don't want to anger anybody, but I don't feel that this is something I can't talk about because it doesn't exist anymore. It's all in the history books. It's all on YouTube if you want to watch what goes on in the Mormon temple. But basically, you'll learn some things to be able to make it into heaven. And in this article, she describes what happens if you disclose that information. And it was god awful. It was like slicing your neck, and it was like cutting out your heart and drawing a line and disemboweling yourself. And I said, that's not true. I said, I just went through the temple back in September of 1993, August of 1993. This was in 94. And I said, this is a lie. And it reassured her.
Dear Elder McKinley and Elder Huffner, I really appreciated it when you gave up your time to explain the temple and discuss the magazine article with me and my family. You really made me feel so much better. I felt that I didn't need a blessing because I'd felt the Spirit so strongly that sometimes I wanted to cry. You are both ace guys, grouse missionaries, and very spiritual. Thanks a million.
And I said, I've been to the temple, and it's not like this. It's not awful. Now, I did go to the temple, and I remember the whole time sitting in the temple just being like, this is weird. This is weird. That's a whole other episode. So jump forward to the following Sunday. I'm in a ward correlation meeting. So the missionaries would have to go and meet with the bishop and the high priest group leader and all the leaders in the ward and the congregation. And we were talking about members of the ward, and the article came up, and I expressed how this one particular family, specifically the older daughter, had had a hard time with it, and that I had reassured her that it was all a bunch of bullshit. And then the bishop said, actually, that did used to belong. They just took it out like a year ago. And I just remember going, what the hell? Like, what?
If I don't do this, I'm gonna have what happen to me?
It wasn't even that. It wasn't even the penalty. It was just how off-putting it sounded and how it didn't feel right. I never vocalized it to anybody. I guess at the time I just kind of accepted it. Later on down my life, as the internet becomes readily available and we can get information and you can read the whole history of who Joseph Smith really was and the things that went on in the early stages of the church. I mean, I wish it would have come out back then, because I might have just packed up my shit and left if I'd have known that. Because all I knew going on a mission were primary songs and what I'd learned during family home evening and Sunday school. And it was just this fearful relationship with disappointing my parents and disappointing God. So anyways, I get home and I get married in the temple to my first wife. And as soon as we get married in the temple, that's it. We stopped going. As soon as we got away from that ever-watching eye that just my parents and my ex-wife's parents, and when we were finally adult at 21 and 18 years old and could decide for ourselves, that just terrifies me saying that she was 18 years old. We were able to decide for ourselves what we really wanted. I remember Sundays, we had a calling. We were teachers. We taught like the 14-year-old teenagers. And I remember laying in bed and being like, dude, we got to get up for church. And just both of us being like, I used to love it when my teachers didn't show up and we'd be able to have that free hour during Sunday school and go, let's do that. Let's be cool. And just found that more often and more often and more often, we just didn't want to go to church. I remember coming home, and before I got married, I was talking to Jen, my wife, about this morning. I remember just coming home and not feeling welcome. I remember going to wards here in Utah, especially down in Provo, the BYU wards. I remember going there and just not feeling the vibe. Just like I've learned about myself that I really pick up and I read people's energy. And I just remember just these feelings of judgment, and these people didn't even really know me, but I didn't feel accepted, and I wasn't vibing with these people. I didn't like their lifestyle. I didn't really want their lifestyle, but yet there I am going out and actively dating to try to get married because it's what had been programmed in my mind.
Well, I think you're still following that program, but at the same time, you've started making your own decisions. You're for the first time ever, you're away from your parents, you're away from family, you're away from church leaders that are kind of overseeing your life, and you're making all the choices on your own.
So there was a couple things that actually happened that really brought light to that really made me go, wow, here I am, I'm doing my own thing. And the only time we would go to church, my ex-wife and I, was when family was coming to visit. And I remember there was one time where my parents came from Seattle and came to church with us in Logan, and we'd lived in the ward for about a year and had never gone to church. And there we are, pretending again, because my parents are there. When you stand up and you introduce your family, and I remember standing up and introducing my dad and having them be like, okay, great. And who are you guys? Who are you now? And just that, oh crap feeling of kind of joking, and I played it off. But I remember just going, what am I doing? Like, the only reason I'm going to church is because my family is here. And it really that really stuck with me. And I mean, at this point, I'm probably 24 years old and 25 and just ready to just rip the Band-Aid off.
Okay, so you've been talking about different things that happened to sort of start pulling you further and further out of the church. So was there any kind of catalyst, any specific thing that finally was like, that's it?
There was a few little things that had been building up for years. Seeing priesthood leaders that were just pieces of shit. I just started really seeing the ugly side of being a member, and it's stuff that I'd seen my whole life. And now I'm an adult and I'm seeing it. But the day that I decided that I wasn't going to go to church anymore and that I wasn't going to be afraid of God anymore, it was the stupidest thing that happened. My oldest son, who's 21, was probably 2.5 to 3 years old at the time. And this was back when DVDs had just come out, and they were, $40, $39.99 for a DVD. And Taylor loved watching Ghostbusters. And one day I was putting stuff away, and I opened up the Ghostbuster case, and he had tried to pull it out, and he broke it. And I just got so mad that he broke this DVD. And I took him upstairs, and I think I probably spanked him, and I put him in his crib. And I just remember being so mad that he had ruined this DVD. And about an hour went by, and I thought I better go in and I better check on him. And I opened up his door, and it was just quiet, and he was sleeping, and he was just this cute little kid just laying there. And I just remember just this feeling of guilt, of how I'd gotten so angry with him. And more than a feeling of guilt, it was more of a feeling of just love for my kid. And I just remember just touching him and just wanting to just pick him up and give him a kiss and tell him that I wasn't mad anymore and I forgave him and that I loved him. And yet I remember just walking out and shutting his door and going and sitting. I had this room that I used as an office. And I just remember sitting there in really contemplative thought going, my whole life I've been told that I'm a child of God and that God is my Father in heaven and that I was created in his image and I have the same traits as him. And I just remember going, okay, so if God is really my dad and I'm like him and he's like me in certain ways, and I'm the dad to Taylor, like, I don't feel like God is going to be mad at me and banish me from his existence. And it was the stupidest little thing that caused me to really step back and examine what love really meant for me and my child and going, why would it be any different? Like, if I loved Taylor this much that nothing he would do would make me not want him to be with me, why would God be any different? And I just remember just almost like taking off a backpack full of just this baggage that I'd been carrying around of fear. And I just took it off and I just decided, okay, that's it. From now on, I'm going to live my life. I'm going to be who I want to be. I'm not going to live in fear of God or disappointing my family or disappointing my parents. And I'm going to just be me. And from that day on, it was over. I stopped worrying. I stopped going to church. I stopped pretending. And that was the big thing.
So now you're there. You've officially taken both feet over that line, right?
Right.
We talked about how big of a thing that would be to families and, to our families in particular, when we were talking about you going on a mission and stuff like that. So my question is, how at that point, how did your family take that? Like, when you went, was there like a time where you sat down and said, look, here's the situation, or did it just come out gradually? But how did that come out, first of all, and then how did they respond to it?
No, I never got the chance to to prepare a statement to my family, to sit down and explain it to them. What would happen was my dad came down from Seattle. They were moving to Utah. And so my dad came down to stay with us up in Logan. And the next door neighbors that we had gotten to be really close with, they became our drinking buddies. and they had us over for dinner, and they invited my dad over, and we're sitting there in their living room, in their kitchen, having this really nice dinner, and everything is going great. My dad had just got to town. He was going to be in town for a week. He was looking for work. And in the middle of dinner, the hostess stood up and she went in the kitchen. I mean, we're just in the dining room, and the kitchen is just right off the dining room. There's no wall. You can see what's going on in the kitchen. And she gets up and she makes my ex-wife a Long Island iced tea and hands it to her with a little stirry straw in it and gives it to her and says, tell me if it's too strong. And I just was like,
Now,
my dad is sitting right there.
hold on real quick, because here's something interesting to me, and I think that's interesting to point out. You've taken both feet over the line, like I just said. You're fully over, and yet the fear is still there. The fear of your dad finding out that your wife was getting a drink that had alcohol in it was still very prevalent.
He just, you could see the look on his face. He was furious. And he sat there for a minute, and it was like, you know, dad just slapped mom at the dinner table, and we're all just sitting there trying to pretend like it didn't happen. And he just excused himself, got up, said, excuse me, I need to leave, and walked out. And I looked at the hostess and I was like, what are you doing? And she said, what? I'm like, you just made her a Long Island iced tea in front of my dad. I was like, oh my God, oh my God, oh my God. I wasn't ready to have this conversation yet, but here it comes. And 5 minutes later, there's a knock on the door, and my dad comes in and goes, Scott, can I have a word with you outside? And I'm just like, fuck. And I'm just walking out, looking at her going, thank you. So we get outside, and I mean, it was basically, he said, is the reason that you don't go to church because your wife is an alcoholic?
Because it's not your fault, right? It's got to be somebody else's fault.
Well, not only that, but he's jumping to the conclusion that his wife's an alcoholic because he saw her get one drink.
That's the first time they've ever seen her drink anything, and she's automatically an alcoholic. And I said, she's not an alcoholic. And he fought with me. I know what a mixed drink looks like. I said, I'm not telling you it wasn't a mixed drink, but I'm telling you that she's not an alcoholic. And he sat there, and I said, the reason I don't go to church, Dad, is because I don't believe it. And the look of disappointment, and he told me that I didn't know what I was saying. And I said, Dad, I'm telling you, I don't believe it. And he said, you're going to tell me that you don't believe that Joseph Smith was a prophet. And I said, I don't believe it. And he packed up his stuff and drove back to Seattle that night. And that was how I announced to my family that I was no longer going to be
So, you know, I want to put myself in his shoes a little bit, because obviously he was indoctrinated the same way you were, and he's held on to those beliefs. And he
totally, I get that,
them very strongly. And so this is a complete shock to him. So I think all of us here have some understanding for that.
I'm the only member of his family.
So for those who can't understand that, it's, I mean, that is maybe, I mean, it's got to be what, top 5 worst things that as a parent he could hear from about one of his kids, you know, that
no longer believe in the church.
Yeah. So it is a huge.
Number one, my dad is a man of faith.
So that not to excuse it, but to explain the reaction.
Oh,
God. So.
Yeah, I mean, I excuse it because I'm aware of it.
Real right, and that's all I want to do is give some understanding to that side of it. I don't. So anyway,
it was awful. It was awful. Our relationship has never been the same since then. My mom, on the other hand, grew up in a less active family. She had family members. Her parents drank. I remember her telling me stories about she used to light her dad's cigarettes for him when she was a little girl. So for her, it wasn't such a pill to swallow. But for my dad, it definitely was. I mean, he took it personally.
So after the shock wore off, I mean, did they grow more understanding, or
They tolerated me, is how it felt. I was tolerated. It was always, it was never spoken, but there was always just this disappointment that probably this hope that I was going to be coming back someday. They don't think I fully left. I don't know, but it sucked because, and I don't know if anybody watching this has experienced this before, where you didn't have a say in when you were going to, let the cat out of the bag and tell everybody the news. It just happened. And so as a result, everything I was doing was fear-based. It was reactionary. I was trying to respond to them instead of being able to come in a loving way and just sit down and go, look, I'm still me. And, ever since then, my relationships with my family members have just deteriorated. It's just gotten worse and worse and worse. Now, as I've learned things about the church and I've shared them with my family, it's just the typical responses. They don't want to listen to me. I've never been asked if I was okay. Like, nobody has ever in my family said, how are you doing? Like, that's got to be the hardest thing, to just lose your faith. And I remember, I was telling Jen about this morning. I remember my uncle came probably in the darkest point of my life. I was divorced. I was working in Provo for Dillard's as an operations manager, and I just hated my life. When I left the church, and I shared this in the first episode, there was nothing. Like, I just went, you know what? If this isn't true, then do I believe this? Do I believe this? And so I just really went to just this dark place. And I remember my uncle coming, and, he probably did this because it was what he was told to do or what he thought to do. But I was so excited we were going to go to lunch together, and we ended up not going to lunch. He only had a short amount of time to visit with me. But there we were at the Provo Town Center Mall walking around, and we sit down on this bench. And instead of being like, how are you doing? Like, where are you at? Like, what have you found? Are you still close to God? What's that? He just bore his testimony.
A simple definition of testimony: something that someone says, especially in a court of law, while formally promising to tell the truth, proof or evidence that something exists or is true.
And it was just, I just remember just being like, this is what I'm going to get, is you're going to just sit here and you're just going to bear your testimony and tell me that it's right and that I need to come back to church because you believe that Joseph Smith he sat there and bore his testimony on this bench. Those of you that have been through it, the last thing you want is somebody listening to respond to you. I wanted him to listen to try to understand why nobody said why. Nobody asked me really why I was leaving. They just told me I was wrong. And that just pissed me off. And that just made it so, I wanted to just step into the life of not being a member of the church. And so I started drinking, and I remember wanting to drink coffee so bad. And so I started drinking coffee, and I started drinking beer. I experimented with some drugs just because for once I wasn't afraid. And I started doing shit because I wanted to do it. And it got ugly, it got ugly. And here we are now, to the place where I was getting passed up for promotions. I was being told that, if I was a member of the church, they'd be able to, the stuff that I was told, the stuff that I've heard from different companies that I worked for, it was ridiculous. When I was up in Logan, it was just judgment, 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 judgment. So I couldn't wait to get out of Logan fast enough, and finally got down to Salt Lake and just started picking up the pieces. I was divorced, and so I started picking up the pieces, and that's when I met Jen.
So I'm going to stop you there for a minute. I'm going to change gears just a little bit.
Okay.
So I want to explain real quick. So when we came home from our mission, Sean, you were from Layton.
Yep.
Ogden
Yep,
area,
Midwest,
which is
Midwest
north of
County.
Salt Lake for people who don't know. I was from a place called Tooele, which is west of Salt Lake, and Scott was from Seattle but moved to Provo, which is south of Salt Lake. At this point in time, Scott, you and your first wife had moved up to Layton or to Logan. Sean, you were still in Ogden or Layton or wherever. And I was still, I'd moved down to Provo, Orem area, which is where I was. So I know, I want to ask Sean, so we saw this from the periphery, what's going on, right? With Scott and this transition. So what was it like for you just watching that happen?
Because you were both still active.
At this point, I had come home, and I wouldn't say that I mean, I questioned, but I kept the questioning, more or less to myself. But I remember you had left to go up to Logan. We got disconnected. We lost touch there for a year or two, and I remember hearing through the grapevine, because we were still talking with many different, missionaries that we were in the mission with, and hearing time after time, oh, have you heard what Scott, have you heard what's going on with Scott? And finally, I think I reached out to you, Rick, to get Scott's number, because I'd lost Scott's, but we ended up having a conversation, and at the end of this conversation, just, what the hell happened to Scott? Because at this point, you're having one of your best friends tell you that he no longer believes in Joseph Smith, and that's a really big deal.
And
right?
not only is it a big deal, but tell me if it was different for you, but for me, not only is it a big deal because of our beliefs at the time, but the whole reason we're together, we're best friends, that we have the relationships we do, were because of that religion.
Because we met on a mission.
Right? So that put another level of weirdness, whatever you want to call it, to the equation for me.
Because really, it was like turning your back with somebody that you'd felt like you'd been in the trenches with. I mean, we'd had an ordeal that doesn't happen to a lot of people. But when you've got your best friend telling you that he's left, and not only has he left, but he's lost his testimony, that really kind of, that kind of threw me for a loop. In fact, I don't think we spoke.
A little personally?
What's that?
Take it a little personally.
Oh, without a doubt, because if you remember, we didn't, at that point, I think it was another couple of years before we talked again.
Yeah.
Because although I wasn't mad at you on the
really talked again until closer to like 2008, 2009. And this was all going on right around 2000, 2001.
Yeah.
So I felt that. Like, I felt it from you. I would see people from the mission and I would feel the judgment. I could feel it. I mean, and as we were saying with my father, it wasn't really their fault, because that's what they were told to believe. That's how they were told to respond. And at the time, it drove me crazy, because I just wanted connection with people. Because when you leave the church in Utah, everybody's Mormon in Utah. And if you leave the church, you're out of the social scene. As far as the people in your neighborhood, they're all members. They all go to the same ward, so they all hang out together. And you're the ones in the ward. Like when I remember when we move into different areas, talking to the neighbors are always like, okay, so that's the Smiths, and those are the Johnsons, and those guys, they're not members, so they don't go to church. We don't know them very well. And then that's the Johnsons, and that's the Howards, and like everybody knows you. But if you don't go to church, your kids don't play the same. You're treated differently, and I felt it from my friends. I didn't really feel it as much with Rick, because Rick was living kind of like a degenerate at the time. He was drinking, and I say degenerate because that's what I was called by a member of the church who didn't like the lifestyle that I had. And so he called me a degenerate.
Now, where I was coming at, so Scott, you were just talking about how you didn't really feel that from me. I came at it from kind of a unique perspective, I guess, in that I still was holding on to my core beliefs. I still felt, and I'll get in detail with this when I go through my story, but I still held on to the idea that I was just living this phase and that eventually I'd get out of it and I'd go back to church and I'd get married in the temple and all that stuff. At the same time, like I said, it was really weird to see my best friend going through this and having those beliefs still, or hanging on to those beliefs. And at the same time, knowing that that's why we were best friends. That's why we knew each other, was because of all that. And he's turning his back on it. I never took it personally so much that you were turning your back on me or anything, but it was crazy for me to think that you were turning your back away from this thing that brought us all together. And so it was weird. Like I said, I was still living in this world where I thought I had these beliefs and I was going to be coming back to that lifestyle eventually, and to see some of the things that you were doing and in that process of going away from the church was surprising to me, but I never felt like it was a personal thing.
Well, I think that because of the fact that our relationship was solidified when we got sent home from our mission, that and the fact that we had connected so much around music and movies, and like, if you said to me what was the one thing that really solidified your guys' friendship, I wouldn't have said the church. I wouldn't say that. I would say fucking Pearl Jam more than I would say the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints.
Well,
it was
yeah,
love for music.
I would too. It wasn't so much the solidifier. It was just that was that started it, that made it possible. But the other side of that was, like you said, I was kind of living that lifestyle myself, even though I was still holding on to the thought that I would end up going back to the church and living that lifestyle. I was already partying and, doing that stuff. And so we never lost track of each other. I mean, we never had that severing that you guys had, because I would still go up to Logan and I would just jump in and do most of the stuff that he was doing up there, because I was doing most of it, not all of it, but I was doing most of it down in Provo with my friends that I had down there that were stuff. So it was a two-sided thing for me. I still had these beliefs I was holding on to, thinking I'd go back, but on the other hand, I was living that kind of lifestyle that he was getting into at that point too. And we still got together and we still talked a lot and stuff. And so
Right. So I just remember one thing that I want to make that really is important is that, back to the whole, how did my family respond? And I mean, to this day, it's been 20 years since I've left the church, at least 20 years. I mean, I didn't go back after getting married in the temple, really. I pretended to go back for about 4 years. I got married in 1996. So for about 4 years, I was in this limbo state. I hadn't made a decision. So there was still options. I would become active if somebody was getting married or if somebody needed a blessing. But I hadn't decided yet. 20 years later from the decision that I made, I still have family members, and it pisses me off every time I hear them say it, that the reason that I left the church is because I got sent home from my mission, because of the experience that I had on my mission. And I'm not currently speaking to my family right now. My father and I, the last conversation we had about the church didn't end well. Both of us said mean things. Both of us just got angry and upset. He was in his program mode. I was in my wake up mode, what's right there in front of you mode. And, so I think in a way to protect himself, we're not talking anymore. However, in a conversation with my father, there was an exchange where he he always apologizes about what I went through on my mission and says how sorry he feels for me that I went through that, and that there were bad leaders and people that were making bad decisions and it affected me, and that he's sorry that I had to go through that. And I responded back and I said, Dad, I said, for years I've heard people say that the reason I left my mission, these are people telling me why I chose to walk away from God and my temple covenants and all of the priesthood that I'd been ordained with, telling me that they know that the reason I don't go to church is because I got sent home for my mission. And I said, Dad, what I've come to realize, partly in this conversation with you, is what caused me to leave my mission wasn't getting sent home, what caused me to leave the church wasn't getting sent home from my mission, but it was actually the fact that I went on a mission. And the veil was dropped. It was funny, Jen used this analogy. She said, you went to Oz and you saw the man behind the curtain. And it's the truth. I got out to Australia and I saw the church from my perspective being a business, being driven by numbers, being driven by baptisms, being driven by collecting tithing from members. And I just went as an adult, I'm not interested in that. I don't have any room for that in my life.
Okay. So think, this isn't, we talk about this whole transition that people go through. It's not just a one-step thing. It's not just you're in, then you're out. That's one step. It's more of like a maybe 3, 4, 5-step process. So we've talked about what it was like growing up and before. We talked about what it was like as you started the process of leaving the church. So what was it that started, you said that you went to a dark place, that things were really bad. What kind of brought you back to start getting into spirituality again?
It was a couple things. The first thing was in 2009, I was given an opportunity to work with a life coach. And in one of the first sessions that we had, probably the first session that we had, he asked me if I believed in God. And it was a trigger. And I just said, I don't believe in God. And if that's what this is about, then I'm out. And, he laughed and he chuckled a little bit. And I love you, Joe, for sticking with me. And he's my brother today. But he's like, part of this is, he's like, you've got to believe that you come from something greater. You come from a force that's greater than you, that created you. And you can quantify God however you want to quantify it. And Joe was actually one of the first people that said to me, and he shared a story with me, having spoken with some leader in the church who told him that he believes that the Mormon faith isn't just the only way to heaven, that there are multiple avenues. And that was the first time I'd ever heard a member say something like that. I'm sure there's probably members that are going, that's not true. But at the time, I kind of heard that. That was the first time that I went, okay, so maybe I can believe in God, but I was still kind of unsure. And now at this point, I'm with Jen, my wife now. We've been married for going on 12 years. We've been together for 12 years. She had left the church as well. She was in a very similar position, just as far as not knowing what she believed. She didn't believe in the Mormon church. We'll have her on. She really wants to share her story because she knows that almost every woman that is in the church has probably heard some of the things that she was told by some of the priesthood leaders. That's just messed up. And so she and I went through an experience which could possibly be an episode. It's more probably appropriate for a Ghost Adventures type episode. But we had a direct experience with the spirit world, which made us step back and go, okay, because I was at that point just believing we die, that's it, it's over, zip, nada, nothing. This is the experience we're having after we die, so long. Well, we had seen something that happened right in front of our eyes in exchange with a power that wasn't in the room, that was moving objects at the requests of us. I actually got in contact with a family member that I've been really close with not a family member, somebody that I consider to be family from Australia, just this family that I had grown to love and really care for. Well, I'd gone to work after these experiences had been happening of this paranormal stuff going on in my house. And I got on Facebook and said, does anybody know how to like get rid of a poltergeist? And this daughter from this family, the same daughter who had read the Good Housekeeping article, she said, you need to talk to mom. She helps people with energy and she helps clear out bad energy. And I went, the old program kicked in and I went, what a crock of shit. You know, what do you mean she helps people with energy? What does that mean? But that was in 2010. Then there was a series of other things that started happening as I was working on personal development and restructuring my adult beliefs based on my own personal experiences, that really caused me to step back and go, there is something out there. There's something else out there. We are energy. Energy has to come from somewhere. That source is what I believe to be God. And that was the journey to me starting over this new belief and this different relationship with God. But I want to make this very clear. I don't believe in a God that is jealous and judgmental and is basically, I mean, I believe in a loving being that doesn't judge me, that isn't wanting to set me up for failure. And I don't mean to offend anybody who has a belief in the traditional God of whether it's the Quran or the Bible or the Torah. That's fine. You believe what you want to believe, but what I believe is I believe in a God that's about love and compassion and none of this bullshit about give me 10% of your money. None of this bullshit about you can't drink beer. I don't think the creator of this world that we live in gives two shits about whether or not I drink a beer or smoke a cigarette or smoke a joint or whatever that might be.
What Scott is talking about here is the word of wisdom. In the Mormon Church, the word of wisdom is a commandment that members live by. The word of wisdom, which one must abide by in order to go to the celestial kingdom, prevents members from using or consuming alcohol, illegal drugs, tobacco, coffee, tea, or other harmful substances.
I just don't believe that. I think there's so many other things that are on the plate that matter way more than just superficial shit like that.
So you've talked about going from belief that you had from your childhood to a belief that there was nothing in terms of God and afterlife and stuff. Now, the next part of the transition has started where you're starting to, okay, now I do believe in some higher being and some afterlife of what, you know, whatever. So how does that belief start coming in? How does that change things?
How does it change things?
Like at the time where you were, and now you start your beliefs are evolving into this new thing. So how does that change things in your life at that time?
Well, what it did was it made me have a desire to have a connection to God. Before, I didn't have any desire because the God that I had been told about was just this dick. And now I'm going, if it's really, I mean, if you look at what Christ taught, what did he teach?
Love.
Love. By this shall men know ye are my disciples if ye have love one to another. It was love. It was don't judge. Judge not lest ye be judged. Like it just, I started going, okay, like I see Jesus now as a teacher of this disciple of love. And it almost was like it resonated with me. A relationship with I don't even see God as a figure. I don't quantify God as a man or a woman. But I see it as this being that just emanates just this energy of love. And in the same sense, I do believe that there is a dark side. I don't necessarily think it's the devil. I don't necessarily think it's the horned beast that walks around on cloven hoofs, or this guy that's walking around trying to trick people into doing things. I just think that there's the opposite, or the absence of love is where that dark energy can come from.
What Scott is talking about here is the law of polarity, which is the principle that everything has two poles, good and evil, love and hate, attraction and disconnection.
It was just, I finally felt comfortable and safe wanting to pursue a relationship with this
Higher being.
bigger thing.
So,
Right.
Okay, so now that you've embarked on that journey, where are things at now? What, as far as spiritually, what is your life like today?
It's crazy because I tell people this all the time. I believe now more in what I've found to be truth. The Mormons would say I have a testimony of it. My testimony of what I've found to be truth, this gospel of love. What's it called, Sean? The rule of one?
The rule of, or the law of one.
The law of one, and the law of one is just love. I teach that to my kids. I teach to my kids, instead of doing things because you're afraid of God judging you, or you're afraid of not being able to take the sacrament or be worthy to go on a mission. It's more just be that change, be the people that are promoting love and acceptance to everybody.
Well, I think a big part of that, and a lot of people won't know this, part of, you talked about Joe and having the opportunity to work with a life coach, and that started your journey into the law of attraction.
Right.
And I think that's what you're talking about, right? You've taught your kids the law of attraction, and how if it's love that you're putting out, then it's love you'll be getting back. And the same goes if you're putting out meanness and evil, then that's what you're going to get back. And that's kind of what you're talking about.
100%. It's energy. Everything is energy. And so the law of attraction is basically just that like attracts like. If I'm living a life of fear and anger and resentment, I've trained myself, I've wired my neurons to be looking for more things that are in harmony with anger and fear and resentment. I don't live my life in fear anymore. I don't live my life with anger. That doesn't mean I don't get angry, but what it means is, my belief is, I've taught myself to shift when I have those thoughts of anger, and I redirect it. Gratitude has become a huge part of my belief system. Gratitude for everything. I'm grateful that I went on a mission. That was one of the best things that ever happened to me. I'm grateful that I met you guys. I'm grateful that I got sent home. I'm grateful that I've gone through the experiences that I did, because it's molded me into who I am today. And I might not be an upstanding member. I'm no longer a member of the church. I did have my name taken off the records of the church. I didn't want to be a part of that community when they started really going after the LGBTQ community back in 2015. And when they made the announcement that they would no longer be blessing babies of family members that were LGBTQ, to me, I just went, that's it. That's enough. I'm not going to be counted amongst those ranks anymore.
One of the interesting things in all of this is that it's not only led to where you are at currently spiritually, but also career-wise, because now that's what you do as, for your career, is you're a coach and you work with people on, learning the law of attraction and how to utilize it on dealing with a lot of the same kind of things that we're talking about here.
Well, it's about energy. I teach people about energy. That's a huge part of it. And look, I have many clients that are very religious, and there's no problem with that. I support people for believing what they want to believe. My intention is not to pull people away. My intention is to reach out to people that are struggling with seeing behind the curtain and going, I don't like what I see behind the curtain, and teaching them how to process that in a way where it can be healthy for them, where it doesn't have to be, the years of guilt and shame of not being included in family things and having family members sneaking into town and not telling me, like that feeling of being less than, that is so prominent when you're a member of a strong religion, the only family member that's the black sheep. And if you want to say that you don't treat me differently, family, that's not true. Nobody has ever tried to put themselves in my shoes to go, what's it like to be Scott? At least nobody's ever come to me and said, I've really been trying to understand where you're coming from. Help me understand where you're coming from. Because they're all too chicken shit. Because they don't want to get into the conversation because they've been told that anything that's not the gospel, it's been written by the devil. And so they want nothing to do with it. And so because of that program, it's keeping them from being able to connect with me.
And the reality is there's a lot of other people out there with very similar stories. And that is the whole purpose of this show, is so that we can tell these stories. And I think the reason it's important for you telling this story is that there's got to be somebody out there that has had to deal with similar things, that can see these three normal guys that have gone through stuff that they might be going through now, and see that they're not the only ones going through it. There's another side that they can get through it and have a much more happier life than what they may be currently having or have ever had.
Yeah.
And that's the whole reason we want to tell these stories in this format, so that hopefully.
And I've got something I'd just like to share in terms of, the support, because you alluded to it earlier, Scott, that, you feel alone, and humans being we're social creatures, we look for that support system. And when family's not the support, I mean, who else is there to turn to? And, when you come from a culture like Mormonism, especially Utah, there's no one really to turn to. And that really kind of presents its own set of challenges in and of itself.
Yeah.
Tony Robbins talks about the 6 human needs, and one of those is connection. And I'll be honest with you, I haven't felt connected to my family since 1996, when I could feel myself pulling away from the church. It just got to a point where as an adult, I had to make the decision that I was no longer going to tolerate feeling less than because I wasn't a part of the faith.
The sad thing is a lot of people have to go through that, and they don't have the connections elsewhere. You talked about how grateful you are that you went on your mission, and that even going through what we went through, and even going through the transition that you've gone through to go out of the church, you're still grateful for having gone through that experience, if nothing else, because it gave you connections outside of your family that you can rely on.
Go ahead.
I was going to say a lot of people don't even have that. And so at the very least, it gave us that.
I remember them saying before I went on my mission that you'll make the best friends that you've ever had in your life. And here we are, 25 years later, we're still best friends. I guess what I want to say to those people that are going through this transition right now, be it from Catholicism or Islam or
religion in general,
any religion, or, as Rick alluded to in the first episode, if you're a Democrat now and your whole family is a Republican and you're having to sit at the kid table during Thanksgiving and they're treating you differently, there are so many people that are going through this right now, even if they're not telling you that they're going through it. I mean, I know the statistics for the Mormon church. Members are dropping like flies ever since, members are just dropping like flies. There are people that are thinking these thoughts and going, I don't feel good about this anymore, just because they're not vocalizing it. It doesn't mean they're not feeling it. And so look, if you're watching this and you're a devout member of the faith, but you have a family member that is inactive, hasn't been to church in years, doesn't live the same lifestyle that you live, The best thing that you could do is just reach out to them and let them know how much you love them, and that if you ever want to talk, that you will be a safe place for them to be able to hold space, and that you'll listen to really try to understand them. You can practice that type of love that Christ taught, that agape love, where you put your judgment aside, you put your own belief system aside. If you can do that, I promise you, you'll find a deeper connection with that family member or that friend, because you're not allowing that program to dictate how you're responding to them. If you just promise to listen, to have a deeper understanding of what they're going through, that would have made the world to me. If a family member would have been like, look, I'd love to hear what you're going through. If you want to talk about it, I promise I'll put my Mormon hat in the corner and I'll just listen, and I'll practice empathy. If you really want to fuel that connection, practice empathy, practice agape love, and see what a difference it makes in talking to that family member who everybody is ousted as the black sheep. They might start feeling that trust and that safetiness to be able to share with you, and maybe you might learn a couple things.
And for the people that are going through this, as we've said multiple times, probably throughout this episode and the first episode, if nothing else, hopefully this show, The Underground, is a safe place for you to come and to get some of that connection with other people. And you can always reach out to us here on the Underground YouTube channel, the Underground Facebook page, and also you can email us at wearetheunderground3@gmail.com, and we'd love to hear from you and answer questions, or just hear your stories and maybe share some of those in future episodes. So
And if you just need somebody to hold space with you, we'll listen.
Absolutely.
If you need to just have a connection with somebody that understands, there are so many people out there. And I know I don't just speak for myself. I know these guys would be willing to sit and have a conversation with anybody that needed to have a conversation.
Absolutely.
I think personally that each of us have gone through our own set of situations, experiences over the last 25 years, that I don't think there's much that we haven't experienced collectively that a lot of people aren't going through or have gone through before.
Sure. And our message is, you don't have to go through it by yourself.
Nope. Sure. Next episode will be either Sean's or myself story, so you'll have to come and
that'll be you, because you were next.
Oh yeah, we already talked about how we were going to do it chronologically, so yeah, it will be my story
of the chronological order, who left when.
Right, so it will be me. We already decided that.
Yeah. I was like the first out of everybody. I was the original degenerate.
True.
Okay.
And we still hold that today.
All right, everybody. Thanks for watching. We appreciate spending the time listening to
us. Thanks for listening, and thanks for contributing. Post in the comments. Don't forget to subscribe to The Underground, and feel free to reach out to us if you have any questions or comments.
Until
have a great week, and stay safe, everybody.
Cheers.
Cheers, everybody. Sean's got his invisible beer.